I'm Lee Seacamp, and this is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
I've never ever envisioned myself being involved in political things or appearing on media. In fact, as a teenager, I resented politics, and my pastor encouraged us to resent politics.
That's Palestinian Lutheran pastor Munther Isaac discussing his new book, Christ in the Rubble, Faith, the Bible, and the Genocide in Gaza.
Who's going to have the courage, the wisdom to challenge this cycle of violence?
We discuss his lived experience as a minister in the West Bank and the collision of politics and theology.
Not losing our humanity is insisting that we are created to love one another, even if it means loving our enemy. When we stop loving, we're no longer human.
All coming right up. Hey friend, if you didn't know, I started a newsletter a while back that comes out every 2 weeks. I've been delighted to hear from so many of you about positive response to the newsletter. We call it the No Small Endeavor Notebook, where I riff on themes and topics related to our podcast, giving you additional material for thinking and doing in your own quest to make sense of what it might mean to live a good life. Join us by going now to nosmallendeavor.com and sign up there. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com to sign up now for our free No Small Endeavor Notebook newsletter.
Every Christmas, I think about the gifts that really matter. Not the wrapped ones under the tree, but the ones that change someone's life forever. And recently, I heard a story from Mercy Ships that I just can't shake. A mom brought her little boy on board. He'd been living with a condition that could be fixed with a simple surgery, but there was no surgeon anywhere near his village. After his free operation, she said, "You've given my son his future back." Y'all, that is a Christmas gift. Globally, 5 billion people lack access to surgical care. In sub-Saharan Africa, there's only one surgeon for every 200,000 people. But Mercy Ships is stepping into that gap in the most beautiful way, bringing free, life-transforming surgeries to people who would otherwise have no access to care. They help the blind see, they straighten twisted limbs, they remove deadly tumors, they treat cleft conditions, and so much more. With state-of-the-art hospital ships, they provide safe surgery for children and adults completely free of charge. And it's all powered by an all-volunteer crew of surgeons, nurses, engineers, cooks, people who give their time and talents to make the world better. And here's where we get to help. Your donation provides free, safe surgeries to people in desperate need of hope. This Christmas, you can make your impact felt, and every gift is matched. Please donate today at mercyships.org/podcast. That's mercyships.org/podcast.
Hey, my friends, have you ever wondered what's actually in your tap water? The truth is, contaminated water can look totally clear while still carrying pollutants that pose real health risks. And here's another surprise. Many common fridge and pitcher filters barely touch the most harmful contaminants. Some bottled water even contains microplastics. So, what can you do? Consider AquaTrue, the countertop water purifier trusted by thousands. It's been independently tested and certified to remove 84 different contaminants, including chlorine, lead, PFAS forever chemicals, and microplastics. Its patented 4-stage reverse osmosis system delivers exceptionally pure, healthy water without any plumbing or installation. AquaTrue has been featured in Business Insider and Popular Science, and Good Housekeeping named it the best countertop water filter. And customers agree. 98% say that their water is cleaner, safer, and healthier. Plus, it comes with a 30-day best-tasting water guarantee. Head to aquatrue.com now to get 20% off your purifier with promo code NSE. That's aquatrue.com. AQUATRU.com. Promo code NSE. I'm Lee Seacamp. This is No Small Endeavor, exploring what it means to live a good life.
To try to speak on a weekly basis every Sunday to our congregation was by no means an easy task.
That's Lutheran pastor Munther Isaac talking to me from his home in the West Bank. Munther was born in Beit Sahur, just a couple of miles outside of Bethlehem. His status as Palestinian Christian makes him a minority. Numerous sources estimate that there are roughly 50,000 Palestinian Christians. I asked him what it's been like to minister to his community during the past 2 years of war.
I pastored 2 churches, one in my hometown of Beit Sahur and then the big one in Bethlehem. The one in Beit Sahur had people from Gaza, people who left Gaza, and people who left a long time ago, but their family is still in Gaza.
As a reminder here, when Munther is speaking of Gaza, that the 2 Palestinian territories of Gaza and the West Bank are separated geographically, 21 to 25 miles or so, depending upon where you measure, and that travel between the 2 is typically prohibited by the State of Israel. Munther's congregations in Bethlehem and Beit Sahur are both in the West Bank.
Some lost loved ones during the war. So what do you say? And how do you comfort? That's when you realize it's not what you say, but the love you show, the support, the presence you make with those people, the constant asking, how's everything, and so on. Because theologically, with such intense killing as we witnessed in the first weeks of the war, coupled with the fact that we prayed for this should end, Lord, stop this, it seems that your prayers are in vain.
Just weeks into the war, numerous congregations came together in Bethlehem at the Church of the Nativity, one of the most revered Christian sites in the world, traditionally regarded as the birthplace of Jesus.
We prayed for protection for those in Gaza, especially those hiding in churches. We knew them, they were talking to us, and for a ceasefire. And I remember, I went home that night and we hear that the church is hit. You keep scrolling, refreshing, where people killed. Next day, we discovered the full number, 18 people. And that's when you wonder, does God even listen? Does he care? And then you discover, as I said, some of our church members lost their loved ones. So what do you tell them?
On October 19, 2023, a building connected to the Church of St. Porphyrius in Gaza City was hit by an Israeli airstrike. Some 400 Palestinian civilians had been sheltering in the compound. 18 were killed.
When people ask, where is God? Why doesn't he listen? I said, I don't know. But I see Jesus asking the same question. I see God on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? So I said, God is under the rubble in Gaza.
Just before Christmas, 2 months after that airstrike, when the death toll in Gaza had reached more than 20,000, Munther preached a sermon to his congregation in Bethlehem. The title of that sermon later became the title of his most recent book, Christ in the Rubble. Video of the service went viral.
You don't think at the time of the impact such words can have, only to realize that God used these words to speak to millions around the world. And to me, it was just my insistence on, what do I say? I have to be intentional. I have to find anything to say to people.
In these last 2 months, the Psalms of Lament have become a precious companion to us. We cried out, my God, why have you forsaken Gaza? Why do you hide your face from Gaza? In our pain, anguish, and lament, we have searched for God and found him under the rubble in Gaza. When we glorify pride and richness, Jesus is under the rubble. When we rely on power, might, and weapons, Jesus is under the rubble. When we justify, rationalize, and theologize the bombing of children, Jesus is under the rubble. Jesus is under the rubble. This is his manger. He is at home with the marginalized, the suffering, the oppressed, and the displaced. This is his manger.
2 years later, Palestinian health authorities have placed the death toll in Gaza at 67,000 since the beginning of the war. reporting that nearly a third of those who died are under the age of 18 years. Today, Munther and I discuss his lived experience of the war, the challenge of nonviolence, and the politics of conflict. Munther joined us from Ramallah in the West Bank. A warning that this segment contains graphic descriptions of the effects of war. Munther, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Lee, for having me, of course.
Yeah, we're grateful for your time. It seems to me that you embody a number of identity markers and commitments that some might find surprising to find all in one human being. You're Palestinian, you're a Christian, and more, you're a pastor. And as a pastor and a Christian, you're committed to nonviolence and reject any forms of terror or war as consistent with Christian discipleship. And it seems to me that is a particularly difficult set of realities for one person to carry in the context in which you find yourself. How did you begin to find your way into that complex set of commitments and identity?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think of it as such because we, as the Palestinian Christian community, feel a very natural connection to the land we live in, whether it's Bethlehem or Jerusalem or Ramallah, where I am now, or Nazareth. And I know that many times people are surprised to know that Palestinian Christians actually exist. However, it should be a surprise if we did not exist, because Christianity started here. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. So we've been a continuous part of this land. We view ourselves actually as the indigenous people of this land. And we feel that we are a continuation of the first church. And even when you talk about nonviolence, actually, one of the biggest misconceptions about Palestinians and the Palestinian struggle for independence and liberation is that it has always been a violent struggle. But in reality, the majority of Palestinian struggle has been nonviolent. So to me, all of these identity markers are actually natural things that come to us, especially as a Palestinian Christian community.
You grew up in the West Bank, and when you think about your childhood and your becoming a young man, what do you look back upon as kind of key markers that contributed to the person that you've become?
To begin with, in addition to playing in the neighborhood with kids, like any normal kid, the memories that come to mind are the first Palestinian uprising, the Intifada, which again was very much a nonviolent struggle, marches, demonstrations. Of course, sometimes throwing rocks at soldiers and the Israeli military in our neighborhood. And at the same time, trying to connect this or make sense of all of this in light of my faith. I grew up pretty much a Bible-believing kid. From as young as 9 or 10 years old, I was committed to going to church, to every meeting, to Sunday school. From a young age, I was committed to reading the Bible page to page on a daily basis. So faith was always something important to me. But looking around me and seeing the struggle of the people, questions that rose at that time, varied. Can we throw rocks at soldiers? Does that contradict our faith and violence? And I remember one of my friends actually who used to say, when I throw rocks, I pray that I miss so that I don't hurt the soldiers. That's the kind of innocent young children kind of mentality we had. But I must admit, I also struggled with the whole issue of Old Testament, Israel, chosen people. It didn't help that in the Palestinian translation of the Bible, we don't have a distinction between Palestinians and the Philistines. So whenever David, who's supposed to be the hero of faith, was fighting, he wasn't fighting the Philistines, he was fighting the Palestinians. So even at a very early stage, being both a very devout person who goes to church and growing up in a very conservative environment, memorizing Bible verses, but then being part of the struggle for liberation with our people, seeing the demonstrations outside of the house, living all of that, you can't help but wonder, what's the connection? How do I reconcile both? So that was a very important element of who I am today.
Okay, so kind of last question about childhood or teenage years. What kind of things do you love to do? What kind of hobbies?
Football.
Football.
You call it soccer.
Yes.
It's football, where we actually use the feet, not just to kick extra points.
Yeah.
And I hope people don't imagine playing football on green fields. No, that means on dirt in the neighborhood. That was the thing we looked for the most. And even in curfews, when we're not allowed to be in the streets by the Israeli military, and all these sneaking in and doing that, because to us, love of football was everything.
I'd like to kind of move towards asking you some questions about your more recent experience. And first, I would just like to note that I know over the last number of years, you've done so many interviews and you've written so much. I would make up that it's got to be exhausting sometimes to continue to retell some of these stories. So I thank you for your willingness to share with us today. And I don't take that for granted. But as you think about the midst of something as horrible as this war, I wonder if there are any particular experiences or images or firsthand accounts that when you think about trying to get at or point at the horrors of what's happened, what are some of those that are kind of ready to hand for you?
There are many stories, and I think this is now the tragedy, the reality of being a Palestinian is that, especially those in Gaza, of course, will carry with them wounds and experiences for the rest of their lives upon generations. But for all Palestinians outside of Gaza, the first few months of this war were very brutal. First, the coverage was more intense, and we were glued to our screens, to our mobiles. Today, you get not just news and information in multiple ways, whether it's social media and so on, but today you've got so many people who, influencers, if you want to call them, or chat groups that just send you constant images from what's happening in Gaza. This is the kind of new reporting. A building is bombed and people immediately run towards that building, which is surprising in itself that the people of Gaza don't run away from the building, but run into the building to rescue people. And they always carry phones to document what's happening. So the images we saw and we continue to see throughout the 2 years, especially in the beginning, were horrifying. It's not the kind of images you get on the Western media. I don't think you see such things of entire families pulled from under the rubble, of schools which became refugees when bombed. I hate to share this, but you see body parts spread all over rooms. When you think back, it's traumatizing because the images were hard, but also the human emotions were hard. And it's hard to talk about it, honestly. There was one image of a father on top of rubble and walking around the rubble, shouting the name of his son and leaning down and shouting, "Can you hear me? Can you hear me?" Trying to put his mouth in the middle of stones, hoping that any sign of life, and people around him realizing no one is alive and they're not knowing how to tell him that. And he's like, "No, let me shout." I mean, this is just one image that among many, many others that we saw. It honestly, it was, the whole period was so intense. And then you have to make a decision, Lee. And it's not an easy decision whether to continue watching, whether to shield yourself from these images and to say, this is not good. And to me, the choice was clear. I can't become numb to such images. I can't just get used to it, and I can't ignore it. I need to be angry by it. I need to cry whenever I watch. I need to be moved by it so that it fueled my activism. And I think we need to pause here and remember we're watching from distance. I know Gaza is 2 hours from here. We have the fear that it could happen here, but this is nothing in comparison to what the people of Gaza themselves experienced for 2 years, every single day. It did not stop. And I remember a friend from Gaza telling me, I think few weeks into the war, how what they experienced in those few weeks is more than all the previous wars combined. He said the previous wars were like a walk in the park in comparison to the first weeks of that. And then imagine that it lasted for 2 years. That's some of the things we can remember that were troubling to us.
You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our conversation with Munther Isaac, Palestinian Christian pastor, who's speaking to us from his home in Ramallah in the West Bank. We're always grateful to hear from you. Tell us what you're reading, who you're paying attention to, or send us feedback about today's episode. You can reach me at lee@nosmallendeavor.com. You can get show notes for this episode in your podcast app or wherever you listen. These notes include links to resources mentioned in this episode and a full transcript. Please tell your friends about No Small Endeavor because that helps extend the reach of the beauty, truth, and goodness we are seeking to sow in the world. Coming up, Munther and I discuss October 7 and its aftermath, the challenge of nonviolence, and when political discourse and theology collide. Hello friends, Lee Seacamp here. Do you ever wish you had more folks to discuss the conversations we offer on No Small Endeavor? Something like a podcast listening club where you could engage big ideas about what it means to live life well and then discuss it with friends and companions? If so, you have stumbled upon the announcement you have been waiting for. We're pleased to announce the start of Endeavor Together, our new initiative that equips and nurtures close-knit communities to talk about the things you actually want to talk about. Each small group conversation series is built upon our podcast content and provides you with super easy to use content with questions, videos, links, and guidance so that you or any good and willing soul can host small group conversations exploring what it means to live a good life. Maybe you'll meet in homes around a table, maybe in a coffee shop or local park, maybe at work during lunch hour, maybe in a church Sunday school class. What we are providing is the scaffolding for good conversation. The rest is up to you. And here's the best part. Thanks to generous support from the Lilly Endowment, it's free. The first two series have been released. The first, Let's Disagree Better, and the second, Vulnerability. Get started today. Visit nosmallendeavor.com and click on Endeavor Together. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com and click on Endeavor Together. Enjoy.
You know how every year there's that one holiday moment that becomes a family favorite, like showing up to a Christmas dinner and bringing a dish that turns out to be the hit of the night? That's what could happen if you bring Omaha steaks, you guys, because nothing says I love you and also please invite me back next year like showing up with the world's best steaks. From holiday hosting to those unforgettable gifts, Omaha Steaks delivers the world's best steak experience. You can gift family and friends USDA certified tender steaks, juicy burgers, cozy comfort meals, and so much more. And right now, during their Sizzle All the Way sale, you can get 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our friends get an extra $35 off with the promo code FUN at checkout. There's nothing like receiving a gift of Omaha Steaks. Everything shows up perfectly packed, super convenient, and the flavor, exceptional. Their filet mignons are unreal, USDA certified, very tender, and every order is backed by their 100% guarantee. They've been America's original butcher since 1917, a family-owned company with over 100 years of expertise, and you taste that care in every bite. It's not just steaks, burgers, chicken, pork, seafood, dessert, they've got everything. So save big on gourmet gifts and more holiday favorites with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide during their Sizzle All the Way sale. And for an extra $35 off, just use the promo code FUN at checkout. Terms apply. See site for details. That's omahasteaks.com, and the code is FUN.
I would love to hear more about just purely at the kind of pastoral level of ministering to your local congregations or to friends in Gaza. What's that pastoral experience been like for you?
Yeah, not easy because you yourself need to be pastored. And it's not as if I had a peaceful heart. I myself needed comfort and help. And again, that's nothing in comparison with those in Gaza. Pastoring, it becomes also more difficult because we function in also a context of anger towards Christians around the world who in the first few weeks of the war made horrible statements that made us angry. But to try to speak on a weekly basis every Sunday to our congregation was by no means an easy task. And my book, Christ in the Rubble, is actually the fruit of that, because I was intentional in trying to find things to say to the people. And many times when you say things, you don't think of what impact they will have. So when I said God is under the rubble in Gaza, and few days later, it became a saying, a meme circulating all over social media. And to me, it was just my insistence on, what do I say? I have to be intentional. I have to find anything to say to people.
Yeah. So that sermon also becomes the title of your most recent book. And you began in chapter 1 talking about October 7. As a pastor, you preached the next day. What's your experience of October 7? And how do you try to narrate that experience to your congregation?
Well, we all lived it. I mean, we all lived through the very slow, by the way, unfolding of information. None of us knew what was happening. It was totally surprising. What we saw is images of Palestinian militants in Israeli settlements shooting at people in the streets. We were shocked. I mean, how did they get there? No one knew the full scale of that day until 3-4 days later. You have to remember that. At the time, we thought it was less than 100 who were killed.
Munther and the world would soon discover that Hamas had killed more than 1,200 men, women, and children in the most brutal terrorist attack in Israel's history. Alongside these killings, Hamas took 251 hostages.
The first impression was shock, because none of us ever thought that the siege around Gaza can be broken by force. We have this impression of the Israeli military as unbeatable, and their technology as, on top of the world. No one can break that surveillance system. And when you just realize later that they've done it in multiple locations, how did that happen? I mean, that's another question in itself. But to us, it was shock. And then the shock turned into fear and anxiety, knowing that retaliation is coming. So we were anxious. We were afraid. I mean, you see immediately people, even in Bethlehem, going to the stores and buying food, to store food in their homes. We knew this is going to last long. And just to remind people, I don't know if you know the details of that day, in addition to the ground attacks that the Palestinian militants did, there were missiles from Gaza into the Israeli territories. These are not technologically advanced missiles, so they miss. And when they aim at Jerusalem, they hit near Bethlehem. Everyone was afraid. We hear the alarm from Jerusalem, the Israeli areas. And the first thing we thought on that morning, we had school, is how to evacuate the school. And just imagine the chaos among these children, the fear, what's happening, why are we going home? Then they hear the sounds, they hear the bombs, they hear explosions. We send messages to parents, come and pick your kids. It was just a very, very difficult day. And as I say, after that, just one update after the other, we were shocked. For example, the attack on the music festival, the extent of that attack was not discovered until a day or two later. We saw the images of attacking military bases. We saw soldiers being captured. We saw a tank on fire. But then gradually, we discovered that it was much, much worse than that. And even from the limited images we saw on day one, I remember saying in church next day, if you have a legitimate cause that does not justify, or something to that extent, killing civilians or dragging dead bodies in streets, this is not acceptable. Again, not knowing the full scale of what happened. But none of us wanted to see October 7th. Sadly, we knew that day will come.
That's a helpful segue, I think, into the next question I wanted to ask. And first, I'd just like to acknowledge for listeners that as I work through your book, you repeatedly state the horror and the criminality of the acts of Hamas on October 7. And yet, at the same time, you insist upon what you call context. So maybe for those who are perhaps unfamiliar with what you might mean by context, what are some of the key things that you wish more people knew about the context? And that would lead you to say something like, we knew such a day was coming.
Yeah, October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. That's what we kept repeating over and over. And the difficult thing is you can't have a conversation these days, a meaningful conversation about any of these issues without always being labeled or misunderstood. So pointing to the context is not to justify what happened on that day, and certainly not to justify the killing of civilians or kidnapping of civilians. But pointing to the context is meant to say that it was not as if the Palestinians were living in peace and Israelis were living in peace. And one day the Palestinians woke up and said, we hate the Jews, let's go kill Jews, as is maybe portrayed in many circles, or as is the conception at least. No, there was a context. And the Palestinian understanding, they are responding to years of oppression, years of displacement, years of having rights denied. And in the immediate context of Gaza, which I tried to explain in detail in the book, years of dehumanizing siege and blockade around Gaza, a siege in which Israelis calculated the amounts of calories allowed to enter Gaza throughout these years. The people of Gaza just lived one war after the other within this siege. The context is that they also tried nonviolence. They tried to march peacefully to the borders to break that siege. The context that matters is that more than 75% or so of the people of Gaza are survivors of the Nakba, meaning they are displaced. The Zionist militias forced them out of their towns and villages, destroyed their towns and villages, and then built Israeli cities on the ruins of Palestinian homes. So Israel as a state, as I kept saying, was literally built on the ruins of the towns and villages of the people of Gaza. You would think that information matters, because we're not talking about hundreds of years ago. We're talking about back then, 75 years or so. People in Gaza still hold keys to their homes that Israelis live in. So imagine someone coming and kicking you out of your home and then denying you your right, and when you fight back. And Lee, what's really important to emphasize is that by the international law, people who are occupied by another military have the right to resist, even using arms, We try to make parallels. I mean, every context is different. We try to say, imagine in the days of slavery, imagine someone who has been enslaved and all of a sudden, after many years of oppression, exploding and killing people. You don't condone or justify the killing or say that's okay, but you understand where it came from. You understand the anger, the frustration. And so there is a context for that war. And after October 7th, we kept hearing over and over, Israel has the right to defend itself. And, that's when, as someone who believes in nonviolence, doesn't support violence at all, I think this is what Jesus taught us. But that's when we become perplexed, because why is it that when Israelis use massive violence, I mean, intense killing, it's justifiable self-defense. But when those who were displaced, oppressed, denied their rights, who live under apartheid, use violence, we're never granted the right to defend ourselves. So we were pleading with people, educate yourself, understand the root causes of all of the issues, understand who is the occupier, who's the occupied, who's the oppressed, who's defending themselves, and so on. And again, the difficulty was having such a conversation without being accused of justifying violence.
Given all of the things that you just shared with us, and as you noted at the beginning there of that conversation, that answer, how difficult it is to have these conversations. I was looking at some reviews today, and one American Christian said that you were increasingly sympathetic to terrorism. What do you do with that kind of critique, given all of the things that you just said?
Where things become really frustrating and where you really become angry and even resentful is when people begin suspecting your daily experiences or questioning the validity of what we experience as Palestinians on a daily basis. I live this thing. I live it. Who are you to question everything I go through on a daily basis? And at the same time, one of the things I wish people consider more is the question is, what would you have done if you were in our place as Palestinians? What would you do when someone pushes you out of your land, your homes, your villages, destroys them, denies you the right to return and rebuild them, then denies you your political rights, imposes the restrictions on your movement, on your family registration, whom you can marry, everything that I tried to explain how much control they have of our life? How would you respond? we need to have this conversation with all honesty. And I know that sometimes people think this is controversial. How do you say? But, we need to think, because terms like terrorists, why is it that you don't apply these terms on Israel? Israel terrorizes Palestinians. Israeli settlers terrorize Palestinians where I live in Ramallah. Israel commits horrible crimes against civilians on a daily basis. They did it for an intensified period in Gaza for 2 years. Why is it that state violence, it's okay, but when Palestinians commit violence, it's terrorism? And again, I've been very consistent before writing the book, before the war. I don't support violence. And sometimes I get in heated conversations with other Palestinians when I say I don't support armed resistance. I just feel that the logic of violence does not help. It's a cycle that does not end. That's our commitment as Palestinian Christians by and large. And so to be accused these things makes you wonder, are they listening? Are they serious? Are they genuine? Why did you read the book if you're not genuine, trying to understand what's happening?
Another label that has obviously been employed a great deal is anti-Semitic, especially when someone, for example, accuses the state of Israel of genocide. Well, it's anti-Semitic to say such a thing. What are some of the particularities in your mind about how that label is getting used?
To me, this is a very, very tragic misuse, sad misuse of the charge of anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is real, it exists, yet to confuse it purposefully by criticism to Israel is really truly shameful. Our problem is with Zionism and with the actions of the state of Israel, not with Jews or with Judaism. And today, some of the strongest opponents of Zionism are Jews themselves. Just recently, I think 2 months ago, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, which is the world's leading body of genocide researchers, has formally declared that Israel's actions in Gaza meet the legal definition of genocide under the Genocide Convention. Are we going then to say that every member of that association is actually anti-Semitic? Really? And then you have Israeli genocide scholars themselves saying that, yes, it is genocide by the definition. Israeli Jewish scholars, some are Zionist. They recognize it as genocide. You have many bodies, including Amnesty International, including Human Rights Watch. You have several UN studies and experts. Are we really suggesting all of them are anti-Semitic? This is becoming ridiculous. The scandal here is that a genocide is taking place, and when people cry there is a genocide, they are attacked.
Coming up, a short break, followed by our discussion on theology and conflict and the human calling to love, even and perhaps especially love of enemies.
Jason, Disney asked me to do this podcast thing. I need some advice.
You've got to have banger guests.
Walker and Leah. Daniel Diemer. Tim Simons. Adam Copeland.
You're the one asking the questions.
How? Why?
And they better answer.
I don't know anything.
Epic.
This season is just makeup.
Quest. I'm Arian Samhadri. Welcome to the Percy Jackson and the Olympians official podcast. Available wherever you get your podcasts. And watch season 2 of Percy Jackson streaming now on Disney Plus and Hulu. Learn more at disneyplus.com/what's-on.
Kraft mac and cheese is the best thing ever. It's even better than pop music. You look just as natural enjoying us at age 13 as you do 55. Kraft mac and cheese. Best thing ever.
I have my own reservations about using this word, but let me just put the question out there and see how you respond. In what ways is such a war religious, and in what ways is it not?
That's a difficult question. We insist that the war is not religious in this sense. Making it a religious war means that Jews and Muslims, I guess, are fighting because they disagree on foundational issues, or they can't get along, or they can't coexist. Historically, this has never been true. I mean, there were tensions sometimes, of course, but to think that Palestinians, Muslims, for example, and Jews cannot coexist, and that this war is fueled by that is not accurate. It's not true. This war has a beginning when European Jews created Zionism, came to Palestine, displaced Palestinians, and established a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine, which was not empty. And since the very beginning of this, Palestinian Christians as well have been fighting against Zionism. So this is what we insist. Please don't make it a religious conflict.
First, I want to read a quote that you had in the book from Albert Einstein, 1939, who you quote as saying, "There could be no greater calamity than a permanent discord between us and the Arab people. We must strive for a just and lasting compromise with the Arab people. Let us recall that in former times no people lived in greater friendship with us than the ancestors of these same Arabs." And then you say, "In fact, an honest assessment of Jewish history shows that Jews suffered most at the hands of Christians, especially in the West, not Arabs or Muslims," which I think is a difficult and yet honorable thing to hear from a Christian pastor trying to grapple with the difficulties of this. Would you give us your precise definition of Zionism and what in the move is particularly problematic?
I mean, this is not my definition. It's what Zionism is. Zionism is establishing a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. And actually, in their early definitions, they talked about a Judenstaat, a Jewish state. So establishing a Jewish state in Palestine. And there are at least two serious problems with these elements. First, Palestine was not empty. So you can use deception, say a land without people for a people without a land. So they describe the land as a land without people. Then you use religious language. You say Jews are returning to their land. So it's the Jewish land. It's their land, the Jews' land, not the Palestinians who lived there for generations. And then you openly talk about displacing the Palestinians. They called it the transfer. That's what they called it, the Zionist leaders. By definition, Zionism is problematic. It necessitates, by definition, the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians as described in the statements and writings of the early Zionist leaders. We are not inventing this. Go and read what they said. And then, of course, the concept of a Jewish state, an exclusive state by nature, a narrow state, a religious state. And we see the results of that in the subsequent Israeli governments, which seek to make the Jewish experience here more superior to everything else, the nation state law. The right for self-determination is exclusive to the Jewish people only. We're not making accusations without merit, without proof. The whole land belongs exclusively to the Jewish people. So this is the problematic nature. And then I can talk about the colonial nature of Zionism. And that's why, as I said in the book, groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, who function from a moral, ethical perspective, they say we stand with justice, I think equality and freedom for all. Zionism is antithetical to all of that. So that's why we don't support Zionism. I mean, they're being very honest, very real here with their own assessment of Zionism based on their Jewish ethos. So that's how I understand Zionism. And that's why I kept saying, are these things that I described, removing people, displacing them, replacing them, using violence, exclusivity, are these in line with the Christian values? Of course not.
I'd love to hear a little more commentary on the real world effects of competing theologies here and the sort of theologies of many American Christians that you have critiqued in the book.
Yeah, I mean, because theology is powerful. It's not just theology, it's a narrative, because you have built a whole religious discourse based on that theology. A religious discourse that says in 1948 Jews returned to their land, which means that a Jew born in Brooklyn, probably to Eastern European Jews, when that Jew immigrates to Palestine, he's returning to his land. And meaning that me as a Palestinian indigenous, been living here for generations, as a Christian, as I said, we go back to the early church possibly, we are strangers here now, it's not our land. So that's the power of theology, a theology that taught and articulated Jewish exceptionalism, a theology that always related to Jews as a special category in Christian doctrines and theologies, as a distinct people. And tragically for the Jews, most of the time in our history as Christians, they played a negative role in our sub-theology or in our theology. They were always vilified. They were always accused of, these are the ones who crucified Jesus, and so on. And then conspiracy theories came out of all of that. Anti-Semitism is real. We're not denying it. They paid a very, very heavy price, painful, with the Holocaust. But then when Christian theology shifted, it turned into the same mentality of Jewish exceptionalism. Now Jews became a topic in our eschatology. We relate to them as an object in our fascination about the end times, maybe. We relate to them as we understand them related to the second coming of Jesus, maybe how they help facilitate the second coming of Jesus and the expansion of the Christian empire and so on. That's the origin of Christian Zionism. And now we as Palestinians are paying a heavy price for all of this, a very, very heavy price, because this did not end. This is continuous.
What do you see at this point as potential ways forward?
These are dark moments, and when we describe them, it's not just about the evil, the killing, the despair, but also about the fact that we don't see a horizon. We don't know what's coming. We don't know what's going to happen. No one knows. If you talk to even experts now on the Palestinian question, no one knows what's going to happen. Instead, our focus is on how do we survive this era? How do we survive this moment in our history? Because we know that the battlefield now has shifted from Gaza into the West Bank. And there is a clear attempt to displace Palestinians from the West Bank. I mean, they're saying, the Israeli Zionist leaders are saying such things. So what's going to happen? We don't know. What do we need to survive is the question we're asking. The so-called peace deal, a peace deal that I have raised so many concerns about because it lacks any concept of justice, reparations, accountability. Can such a thing lead to peace? But then apart from that, you go to the details. There are so many details that were not addressed. And we're questioning, is this real, what they proposed? Who's going to be in charge? Will there be an international force? What's the stages? How long will this rebuilding last? Who's going to fund it? How long will people last waiting in tents? You're talking about almost 2 million people who live in tents now. You know that. They have no homes. How long does it take to remove the rubble? There are so many unanswered questions. How will they find clean water? I mean, simple questions that we don't know. What's going to happen in the West Bank? Will it be annexed? No one knows what is going to happen. What's called for these days is the resilience, the steadfastness that is needed in these very, very difficult days. And to be honest, that's what I see even my role as a pastor. How do I plant the seeds of steadfastness in the lives of our people?
Our last question that relates to what you just shared there on the sermon you preached on October 8th following the Hamas massacre. You said to your congregation, our call is not to lose our humanity in our rejection of and resistance to evil, and in our self-defense, we must strive not to lose our humanity. And I wonder, as you've worked so diligently and sought to bear witness to what's happening and to pastor in that context, what has that quest not to lose your humanity looked like for you?
Yeah, to me, that means being consumed by anger and the desire to avenge and kill. To me, that means shifting to dehumanizing and stereotyping others and not seeing the image of God even in your enemy. To me, that means, and this is a very difficult thing to say today, insisting that the way forward is not by eliminating our opponent, but by transforming them and moving them into a place where we will live together and share the land. In my understanding, in my advocacy, in my thinking, it entails grassroots mobilization around the world to sanction Israel, to isolate Israel, to boycott Israel, until the Zionist leaders and the Israelis are convinced that we can't continue oppressing and we can't eliminate the Palestinians. America is funding these wars and is giving them immunity to the extent that a war criminal like Netanyahu, again, does not have to fear the consequences of being labeled as such. And, there's an arrest warrant against him from the ICC.
The International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, on 21 November 2024. The charges read, quote, allegedly responsible for the war crimes of starvation as a method of warfare and of intentionally directing an attack against the civilian population, and the crimes against humanity of murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts, end quote. Joe Biden, U.S. President at the time of the issuance of the warrant, and Benjamin Netanyahu rejected the legitimacy of the International Criminal Court claims.
When I say, going back to your question, that our goal is not to eliminate, but to transform our opponents, I'm not being naive. I'm thinking of strategies of what we call creative resistance. That is not driven by hate. That does not dream of avenging towards killing. And that's the human nature. And so how do we show the world an alternative? Who's going to have the courage, the wisdom to challenge this cycle of violence? Not losing our humanity is insisting that we are created to love one another. Love is the human character. Even if it means loving our enemy. When we stop loving, we're no longer human.
I've been talking to Munther Isaac, Palestinian Christian theologian, joining us today from Ramallah. Munther, thank you so much for the generosity of your time, and we're grateful.
Again, thank you for having me.
Here's one small closing take on our conversation with Munther Isaac. 3 matters that especially caught my attention. First, how often honest commentary gets twisted into something one neither believes nor intends to say. To condemn the horrors of October 7 while also naming the wider context is, for some, enough to brand you sympathetic to terrorism. It reminds me that one of the fiercest battlegrounds, beyond the literal ones, is our imagination, what we will or will not allow ourselves to consider or understand. Second, I've kept turning over what I'd call the morality of looking and not looking. Munther had to discern when to look at the images and news from the war and when to step back, because constant exposure threatens to deaden the heart. When he did look, he insisted on staying vulnerable. I need to be angry. I need to cry whenever I watch. I can't become numb, he said. That's a particular kind of courage, neither voyeurism nor detachment, but guarding the heart against an overexposure that erodes compassion. Last, and perhaps most instructive, is how our conversation ended. His insistence that amidst all the horror and killing that we not lose our humanity. Not losing our humanity, he said, is insisting that we are created to love one another, even if it means loving our enemy. When we stop loving, we are no longer human. For those of us who live with far more safety and stability, it's easy to sentimentalize such love. For Munther, it's a discipline, resisting the gravitational pull of hatred, refusing to let vengeance script our desires, and practicing what Munther calls creative resistance in the logic of love. A resistance aimed not at annihilating an enemy, but transforming them. Costly, slow, demanding, and perhaps the only way out of a maddening cycle of violence and revenge. That's one small, but not so small take on today's episode. You've been listening to No Small Endeavor and our interview with Munther Isaac, Palestinian theologian, speaking to us about his experience as a Christian pastor in the West Bank, especially in these last 2 years of war in Gaza. We gratefully acknowledge the support of Lilly Endowment Incorporated, a private philanthropic foundation supporting the causes of community development, education, and religion. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carriot Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.
Hey, Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. You know, one of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. Mm-hmm. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.